you're on the top right, and General Shelton is right next to you. And Dr. Kennedy is going to introduce you, Dr. Shelton.
Please take your seats. Let me first say it's a great pleasure to have the Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, Bill Cohen with us, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hugh Shelton with us. We hope the next time we see you, it will be at the Marshall Center in Garmisch. What we will do today is I will introduce each of the speakers who will have a chance to address you, and then we'll take questions from there. The first speaker today will be General Hugh Shelton. General Hugh Shelton is the 14th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was appointed Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff October 1st, 1997. And in that capacity, as all of you know, he serves as Principal Advisor to the President, to the Secretary of Defense, and to the National Security Council for military matters. He's had a long and distinguished career. Before being appointed Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he served as Commander-in-Chief of the United States' Special Operations Command. He has served 2 tours in Vietnam. He served as the Assistant Division Commander for Operations with the 101st Airborne in their deployment to the Gulf during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. In 1993, he was promoted to Lieutenant General and given command of the 18th Airborne Corps. In 1994, he was promoted. He commanded the Joint Task Force during Operation Uphold Democracy in Haiti. And in 1996, he was promoted Commander-in-Chief of Special Operations Command. It's a great pleasure to have you join us today, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kennedy. First of all, let me say that I'm absolutely amazed. I have trouble remembering all that stuff myself, but it's very kind of you, and I appreciate the very warm introduction. And also, let me commend you for your leadership of the George C. Marshall European Center for Strategic Studies. The Marshall Center's work to promote democratic values and enduring relationships among our nations has played a very key role in fostering peace and stability throughout the region. You and the 28 nations that you represent are at the vanguard of efforts to build a framework for peace and prosperity in Europe and Central Asia, and that, of course, is what the Marshall Center is all about. Let me begin by congratulating each of you, all highly regarded members of your country's armed forces or government, on your selection for such an important and broadening experience. What you see and learn in your Marshall Center experience will be invaluable in the years ahead as you move up to even more senior and responsible positions. Only a few years ago, we faced each other across a great divide, but today, we are friends and partners. And I think that is a wonderful testimonial to how far we have all come in breaking down the barriers that once divided us. Today, our nations are finally working as friends with common aims, striving to build a better future for our children and their children, a goal that I'm sure we all share. The NATO-sponsored Partnership for Peace program stands as a shining example of what the future holds for cooperation in Europe and Central Asia. Just a decade ago, none of us could have imagined such things taking place. From a military perspective, the partnership has strengthened the interaction between members, it has enhanced interoperability, and prepared many nations to participate with NATO in humanitarian and peacekeeping operations. In Bosnia, troops from 15 partner nations serve alongside NATO forces, and that has made all the difference in stopping the bloodshed and bringing hope to that troubled nation. Moreover, in 1997 alone, partner nations participated in more than 40 exercises and other events across Europe and Central Asia. And next week, the United States Senate is expected to vote on the agreement that would allow 3 partner nations to become NATO members. Over the last 4 years, the Partnership for Peace has fulfilled its promise of greater political and military integration between the member nations. But even considering all the great progress that our countries have made, much remains to be done. So I hope that each of you feel a great sense of excitement and a burden of responsibility, because every one of you will have a vital role to play. I wish all of you Godspeed in the task of establishing the foundation for lasting peace and stability. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the head of the United States Department of Defense. Please join me in welcoming the Secretary of Defense, William S. Cohen.
I've had many introductions during the course of 25 years of public service, and of all the introductions that I've had, what you just heard was the briefest. I'm teasing him because he gave a very elaborate introduction of me some time ago, and he was severely criticized for being so praiseworthy, so I think he's making up for it here this afternoon. Let me say to all of you, welcome. That in my office upstairs, I have a portrait that hangs over my desk. It is the portrait of George C. Marshall. And he is a great soldier and statesman, certainly of the 20th century. And I chose to keep his portrait over that desk because given the option of having another former Secretary, Forrestal, who ended up committing suicide in his later years, I decided that Marshall certainly was a more preferable option. But I'm kidding you again in the sense that Marshall stands as one of the true heroes of this century, and he had a vision. He had a vision for Europe that would be undivided, it would be whole, it would be free, and it would be prosperous. At the end of the Cold War, when the Berlin Wall came tumbling down, we have an opportunity to make that dream of his a reality. And that, of course, is precisely the reason for the Marshall Center, is to take the young leaders from all of the countries who would wish to share in that dream and to help foster ties and intellectual exchanges and a realization of what is possible in a free society, and helping to define what the role of the military is in a democracy and a free society, where there is civilian control over the military, where we have full openness and accountability, and that we must share that accountability with our Congress of the United States and with the American people. And so this is an opportunity for other nations to take advantage of what is offered at the Marshall Center, to learn from each other, to share your experiences, and to learn from others. At the end of that Cold War, there was a paper that was presented by Francis Fukuyama. Some of you may recall that he called it the end of history. And what he was suggesting at that time was that democratic liberalism and economic capitalism was going to sweep across the globe. And it produced a comment from a South African academician by the name of Peter Vale, who said, "Rejoice, my friends, or weep with sorrow. What California is today, the world will be tomorrow." I'm not sure how that translates, but for those of you who are getting at the straight English, there's a little bit of irony involved in all of that. If you're from California, you will not appreciate that comment. If you're not from California but Maine, you might. But in any event, what Fukuyama proposed was this general concept sweeping throughout all of the European theater, certainly, and into Asia. And it produced something of a backlash from people like Robert Huntington, Samuel Huntington, I should say. And he wrote his book called The Clash of Civilization. in which he saw a future that was filled with ethnic conflict, with religious dissension, and with a clash of cultures across the globe, from Confucian to Orthodox and Christian, and that Fukuyama didn't take that into account. So whether you believe Fukuyama was right or you believe in Huntington, what the Marshall Center is saying is that we're really at the dawn of a new era where we have the opportunity to make choices. We can choose to yield to the clash of cultures, or we can try to pursue an opportunity to share in a common vision for what we want for all of our peoples. And so I think that the very fact that you are students at the Marshall Center indicates that your choice is one that's pursuing the common vision. And it doesn't mean you have to have a common culture, but it does mean you have to share the same ideals for a free and open society in which the military has, and obviously, a very important role. When I say that you're students, there's something that we say in this country, that we believe in school ties. And what you will find, I think you're 86 in number, but you will number, I think, a total of about 800 people who have, or more, who have passed through the center since its creation. And part of the benefit of being students, of course, is that you will maintain these ties during the course of your lives. The people that you meet during this experience will remain your friends. You will have an opportunity to come into contact with each other over the years. And based on my own experience for the past 25 years in being in public office, I can tell you there is nothing more important than building these invisible bonds that we share. I know that we have some Russian students in the audience, and I might say that I had some years ago established some very strong ties with a couple of your poets, Yevtushenko and Vosnesensky. And as a result of those friendships, we have stayed in touch over the years, and they have had, I think, a very major impact on some of our policies, believe it or not. When Mr. Vosnesensky came and he met with Ronald Reagan, and I arranged for a very brief meeting with him so that he could express to an American president the need for greater cultural exchanges. And what Vosnesensky wanted was for us to read more Russian writers, so we'd have a better appreciation of Russia's history, and to start sharing writers and musicians and students, and indeed even soldiers. As a result of that meeting, there was an immediate meltdown of any ice cap that might have existed at that time. And Ronald Reagan said, this is important, you're right. And things started to take place from that moment on. But I mention this only in connection with the importance of maintaining these ties. Yevtushenko said something to me, and I quoted it at the National Press Club this afternoon, that he said, you and I must stay in touch with each other. Otherwise, we'll forget each other's faces. And when you forget each other's faces, then in a time of crisis, it becomes quite easy to demonize the other side. And what this experience is helping, I think, you to do, and hopefully will succeed in doing that, is to resist that temptation when there are disputes or conflicts or tensions to demonize the other side, but rather to seek ways in which you can find common ground. And so that's all part of this experience, but yours is really focusing upon the military aspect, and of course NATO enlargement is part of it. I know this is controversial in Russian circles and others. The Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council is also very important, and that's another breakthrough I think that we have had. The chairman just talked about Bosnia, and he and I have both been to Bosnia on many occasions, and I don't think that either one of us ever would have thought 5 or 10 years ago that we would see some 31 or even 40 nations who are standing shoulder to shoulder together in the cause of peace in that particular tortured country. And so all of this is very important, and I will finish with a reference to Václav Havel, who came before a joint session of Congress some years ago, and he got up and his first words were, "Things are happening so quickly, we have little time to be astonished." And all of us who are living in this age of Toffler's future shock understand that things are happening very rapidly. And time has become speeded up by events, and there's really not much opportunity to make the kinds of decisions that we are called upon to make. And again, all the more important that all of you pass through the Marshall Center as students and to build these ties and this understanding that hopefully will serve all of us well in the future. So I had a 15 or 20 page speech that I was going to give you. I'm about, with this one page, to exceed the length of that. Let me stop and commend all of you for being willing to participate in this program. It's, I think, going to be invaluable not only to you but to us as well.
Mr. Secretary and the Chairman will now take your questions. If you please raise a hand, I will recognize you. And go ahead, please, sir, you first.
You go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry, this is the translation. In that case,
No, it's okay. No, it's all right. He's going to ask you a question.
Я служу в Министерстве обороны России. Моя фамилия Мансуров Марс.
I'm from the Defense Ministry of the Russian Federation. My name is Mars Mansurov.
Прежде всего, уважаемые господа, разрешите поблагодарить в вашем лице правительство Соединенных Штатов Америки за то, что позволили нам посетить Соединенные Штаты и в том числе цитадель Министерства обороны Пентагон.
First of all, distinguished sirs, I would like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to come to the United States to visit Congress and also to visit Pentagon.
Разрешите вас поблагодарить за то, что вы нашли возможность встретиться с нами.
And thank you very much that you have taken out the time to meet with us this afternoon.
Учитывая напряженный рабочий день, у меня вопрос не очень сложный.
Since we have had a very busy day, I would like to ask only a simple question.
Каковы, на ваш взгляд, перспективы развития военного сотрудничества с Россией и с другими государствами новых независимых государств?
What do you think are the prospects for a further military cooperation with the Russian Federation and also with the other newly independent states?
Спасибо.
Let me try to answer that first. I'd like to say we really do appreciate having a chance to spend a few moments with you. As a matter of fact, I think that we are looking forward to spending this half hour with you because we have to face the United States Congress tomorrow for 3 hours. So we are really sort of getting ready for our testimony on the Hill tomorrow. But I think the prospects for more cooperation are greater. I have, again, been visiting in your country just recently. I was in Moscow about 3 weeks ago and had occasion to sit down with 6 or 7 members of the Duma to talk about issues of concern to them, to meet with your Minister of Defense, Minister Sergeyev, to talk about ways in which we can reduce the level of nuclear arms in our countries, START 2 ratification, moving on to START 3. To find ways in which we can pursue the NATO-Russia Charter, the Founding Act, ways in which we can exchange information, technology in terms of dealing with issues that will confront us in the future. So I think based upon our experience in Bosnia, and if you were to stop by my office in my glass display case in my office, you would see a blue beret that was given to me by a Russian soldier when I was visiting there a year or two ago. And he was so enthusiastic and so proud to be a part of that mission that he took off his hat and he gave it to me as a sign of his friendship and appreciation. I think that sentiment is being repeated or replicated day after day, and we're seeing a greater sense of desire to cooperate on a variety of issues. We saw most recently a dispute, not a dispute, but a disagreement on whether or not force should be used in Iraq. Russia had a different opinion than the United States and other countries, but nonetheless that did not interfere with the larger, broader agenda that we have on a variety of issues in which we seek to cooperate. You had Mr. Chandler-Mirden, who was here last week, again pursuing issues, environment, other issues of concern to us, missile and other types of technology transfer and proliferation, all of that I think bodes well if we keep talking to each other.
And I would just add that I have also had the opportunity to meet with your Chief of Defense, General Kabashny. We have discussed mutual areas of cooperation to include more combined type exercises. We've also looked at increasing Russia's participation in the Partnership for Peace program and several other initiatives that are ongoing. And so we feel that one of the best ways that we can break down the mistrust that existed in previous years and increase the mutual trust and bonds between our forces is through greater military-to-military contacts. And in essence, as I've said before in speeches, trying to replace the Iron Curtain with a picture window, so that the more we get to know one another, the more we work together, the more we are likely to understand each other better and understand what the goals and aims are, which I think will serve us both well.
Uslan Magdiev from Uzbekistan.
У меня вопрос к вам, мистер Шелтон. Как известно, до сих пор нет консенсуса в отношении того, какому командованию должна принадлежать Центральная Азия. И мне бы хотелось, чтобы вы рассказали подробнее об этой дискуссии, которая ведется, должна относиться к центральному командованию, к европейскому командованию, и рассказать о тех критериях, по которым будет приниматься конечное решение. И также
I have a question for you, General. So far, there has not been reached a final agreement under which command Central Asia should come. Should that be under Central Command, European Command, and what would be the final criteria for deciding this question?
И также у меня вопрос к вам, мистер Коуэн. Мне бы хотелось узнать об инициативах, будущих инициативах в отношении Центральной Азии и, в частности, об инициативах урегулирования конфликта в Таджикистане.
You only get one question, he has to answer it. But the same.
Also, I have a question for you, Minister Cohen, which is what are the further initiatives in the future concerning Central Asia, and what will be done on part of the United States for solving the Tajik problem?
Thank you very much for your question. It is a very important issue, and as you know, the United States divides the world basically up into 5 geographical areas, of which the recommendation has been that they would be placed under Central Command for oversight and for working with the governments and the militaries within that region. But all of the others unassigned nations of the world right now are part of a biannual review that we do. It's called the Unified Command Plan that ultimately goes to the Secretary of Defense and then to the President for a decision. And so those that are not assigned by the current plan will be reviewed during this next cycle for a 1999 decision as to whether or not to place them under one of these 5 respective commanders-in-chief.
With respect to the other areas that we are going to pursue, obviously arms reductions are one of the most important. I mentioned before START 2 ratification in the Duma would be very an area. Cooperative threat reduction. This is something, a so-called Nunn-Lugar program. When I was in Moscow recently, I went out to visit one of the sites to see the kind of technology that the United States is helping to provide in order to have a safe disposal of the nuclear materials. We're also applying it to chemical weapons as well. Those areas obviously are where we're going to continue to cooperate. We would also try to cooperate in environmental issues. I mentioned the Chairman Mirdan Gore and Gore Chairman Mirdan, depending where you are, who gets first billing. But the Gore Chairman Mirdan Commission, as such, is talking about environmental aspects that ozone depletion, other types of things that would be important, as well as how we can reduce the amount of weapons proliferation that's taking place. So there is no shortage of issues that we have to discuss and can cooperate on. In addition, as far as Tajikistan is concerned, we think that the Partnership for Peace program is something that is very desirable for Tajikistan and the other stands, that as long as we can have people who are willing to exercise together, to cooperate in the planning and the carrying out of peacekeeping missions, humanitarian operations, that brings people together in a way that I think will be beneficial to that country as well as to our own.
So, my name is Zbigniew. I am from the Republic of Poland, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I have a question to Mr. Cohen. Assuming that the three accession countries will finally become the NATO members, how long does it take, in your opinion, to include them fully into the decision-making process within the NATO organization, and what factors will play the key role in this process? What factors will play the key role in this process? Thank you.
Well, as soon as the ratification process is completed, I would expect it would be completed by the end of this year with all the countries who have to pass judgment through their various parliaments. And once a country is admitted, then it becomes a partner in the NATO organization as such and structure. A lot will depend in terms of the individual countries. Poland, in this particular aspect, how quickly are you going to be able to make the kind of changes necessary to upgrade your military capabilities to be a full participant as such? We are looking at a period of time from now for the next 10 years for the three countries who are coming in order to have a fully integrated, upgraded capability. But the responsibilities begin immediately. It's not a question of waiting until you have the full military capability in terms of upgrading the airfields. What we look for really is training personnel. The most important thing that Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary can do is to get a strong, vital NCO corps, non-commissioned officer corps. That is the heart of having a solid military capability. We want to see greater efficiency in language, for example, so that we can talk to each other. We want to place the emphasis on education and also on command, control, communication, so that we can communicate together. And then at the very end of that spectrum, you look at upgrading the equipment itself, the high-tech, sophisticated equipment. That comes last in our judgment. So what you have to have is emphasis on people, and that should begin immediately. Many are already doing that. So the obligations come quickly, responsibilities come quickly. The capability may take anywhere from 3 to 5 to 10 years, but it doesn't have any impact upon being integrated into the system.
Thank you.
I'm the representative of Lithuania. I would like just briefly to say that and assure that I may reflect the whole the auditorium here and to say that Marshall Center really is the place where we found this course very useful, and that the taxpayers' money which Marshall Center pays for us and for all this is really something which it's really proved to be very sufficient and efficient way. And I would like just to take this opportunity to express our great appreciation to Marshall Center and to the U.S. government for this opportunity for us to study a little bit. But the question is a little bit about different subject. And I would like to ask you, the three Baltic states and the U.S. signed the charter at the beginning of this year, which is not legally binding document. I would like to hear your opinion. How much this document would give the impetus for the strengthening security of those three Baltic states with the not very feasible the membership of three Baltic states in NATO alliance? Thank you.
Well, the signing of this non-binding document as such is really symbolic in nature. But symbols are important, and the symbolism involved is that, yes, we would like to see greater participation on the part of the Baltic states in various PFP exercises. We've talked about NATO enlargement, that no country is excluded by virtue of geography. But this is a long process. The door is open, but there are very steep stairs that one has to climb to get through the door at the top of the steps. We are trying to approach it in that fashion. In the meantime, we look at the Partnership for Peace program as really the building blocks for countries who may or may not come into a formal NATO membership in the future. For example, I was in Ukraine last summer, and I saw the end of a Partnership for Peace exercise in Ukraine. And I can tell you that the American forces who were there, many from the Guard and Reserve units, were anxious to come back. They had such a great experience in that exercise with 10 other countries that were there that they couldn't wait to come back and exercise again. And this sort of building of a spirit of cooperation, understanding, I think is a benefit, a great benefit to us as well. This is something we're able to pass on our values and our insights. We're able to benefit from the value and insights of others as well. So I think that is a program that the Baltic states could certainly take advantage of.
My name is Małgorzata Koszura. I'm also from Poland, the Ministry of Defense. My question is, as we were during our course in Marshall Center, we were talking a lot about the revision of strategic concept of NATO. And I would like to ask you, what will be the role of the three invitees in this process during the next year, as we are not the members of the NATO, but how do you perceive our role in this process? Just how do you perceive the role of three invited countries in the process of the NATO strategic concept revision? I mean, will we have any role in this? How do you...
Prior to gaining admission?
Sorry?
I mean, prior to actually being formally accepted?
Yes.
To give you an example, we had a NATO meeting in Brussels last December. And there were members from the three invites who were there. They participated in the EAPC. We had a larger meeting with some 40 countries. We had the three invitees who were there at the conference. To the extent that they are awaiting formal accession, they are not able to participate in terms of the voting and the consensus building that takes place in there, but they nonetheless, their presence, by their very presence, they're building ties, they're building bonds that will serve them well as soon as they come in. But they don't have a formal role. It is informal in nature, but nonetheless, it's very important. Let me give you an example of how we look at this situation. When it came time to deciding whether or not the United States and Great Britain and other countries should be considering the possibility of using force in order to get compliance out of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, there were 13 out of 16 NATO members who agreed to support that effort. There were also 16 out of 19, including the three new members, who said, "Let us help." So the three nations of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary were ready, willing, and able to participate in that effort as far as sharing that burden. That was a very strong sign as far as what their role will be in the future, the willingness to bear the burdens as well as enjoy the benefits of membership. That was not specifically a NATO operation, but 13 out of the NATO countries, out of the 16, said we are willing to help, and then you had the three new members who were willing to help. That was a very good sign of their level of participation, and it will be in the future as far as NATO is concerned.
Mijn naam is Mojca Piršec, ik kom uit Slovenië.
My name is Mojca Piršec, I'm from Slovenia.
Herr Minister, die Erfahrungen auf dem Balkan zeigen, dass eine Krise bereits in ihrer Entwicklung erkannt und ihr mit entschlossenen kollektiven Handlungen entgegengetreten werden müsste.
Mr. Secretary, our experiences on the Balkan Peninsula show us that a crisis should be recognized while it is developing, and that one should move toward a possible solution even at this point in the development of the crisis with decisive measures.
Wir sehen Sie die neue amerikanische Engagement auf dem Balkan nach dem Juni 98 und in Kosovo aus?
How do you see the continued or new engagement of the United States in the Balkan area after June of '98 and in the region of Kosovo?
Well, after June of '98, as you know, the President of the United States, President Clinton, has indicated he wants the United States to stay in Bosnia. The chairman and I are going up to Capitol Hill tomorrow to testify on the United States' role in Bosnia following June of this year. It still remains controversial as far as members of Congress are concerned. Many take the position that it is not in the United States' interest to be militarily present, if not engaged, in Bosnia. And they take the position that this is really a European problem and not an American problem. And of course, we will then try to explain or articulate our view that if there is difficulty or instability in Europe, that can have a major impact upon American security as well. And as we're looking at an ever-shrinking globe, technology is reducing the size of the globe to a very small ball today. That what takes place in other countries may have seemed distant and remote 10 or 15 years ago or 20 years ago. It is less remote today by virtue of the closeness that technology has generated. So we will attempt to make the case that it's important for us to remain. There are issues that have to be decided in terms of how long, how can we predict what our role will be into the future, how much will it cost. We will be requesting some $487 million just to cover the costs between June of this year and September. And then we'll be requesting beyond that another $1.9 billion for the next fiscal year, all of which we're asking in addition to the current budget that we have. So that's going to stimulate a lot of controversy, to say the least. But we believe that we have a very strong case to make that it's important for the United States to remain longer, that we have in fact been successful. We, along with all of our allies, have been successful in helping to stabilize that portion of the Balkans. That Kosovo does in fact present a very serious challenge to all. That it's important that the European countries, as well as the United States, try to come to a resolution very quickly on what measures need to be taken diplomatically, perhaps even economically, to see if we can't persuade both parties that they should lower the tensions, that we would hope that there would not be a return to the status quo, that namely we think that in Kosovo there should be some granting of additional autonomy, but we do not support independence. And by the same token, we do not want to see Milosevic lending support to a crackdown that would only stir up the kind of ethnic conflict that could spill over into many other regions that would affect a much larger portion of Europe. So we're hoping we do recognize the volatility of what is taking place there, and what we need to have is concerted action, not action by the United States acting alone. The Europeans obviously need to have some kind of a consolidated opinion on what needs to be done, and then working together we can hopefully reinforce the diplomatic initiative that is now underway.
I think we have time for two more questions. You and then you.
Майор Игнащенко, Министерство обороны Республики Беларусь. Господин министр, надеюсь, мы все верим в то, что идеи Фукуямы в итоге победят Хантингтона. Но мы видим также, что в настоящее время этой победе необходима помощь вооруженных сил. При каких условиях, с вашей точки зрения, эта помощь перестанет быть необходимой? Когда и, самое главное, как это может произойти?
Повторите, пожалуйста, вторую часть вашего вопроса.
При каких условиях эта помощь перестанет быть необходимой, когда и, самое главное, как, с точки зрения господина министра, это может произойти?
Is this directed to the general?
Прошу прощения, помощь вооруженным силам.
Вооруженных сил идея. Еще раз повторить вопрос.
Пожалуйста.
Мы все верим в победу идей Фукуямы над идеями Хантингтона.
И дальше.
Но пока этой победе требуется помощь вооруженных сил. Мы видим это. При каких условиях, с точки зрения господина министра, помощь вооруженных сил этим идеям перестанет быть необходимой, когда и как это может произойти?
Would you repeat that one more time?
My name is Mayor Ignashenko. I'm from the Defense Ministry of Belarus. We all know and we all hope that the idea of Fukuyama in the end will overrule the idea of Huntington. But nevertheless, this is still necessary for a victory, for supporting the armed forces. When and at which point will this no longer be necessary?
At which point armed forces will no longer be necessary? Is that the import of the question?
Имеете ли вы в виду, на какой этапе вооруженных сил больше не будут необходимы?
Wouldn't you rather talk about integrated training? First of all, with respect to promoting Fukuyama's vision, that we would see the spread of democratic liberalism, economic capitalism. To the extent that that spreads, to the extent that we see, for example, without getting into a major controversy here, in terms of viewpoints on NATO enlargement, but to the extent that we create greater stability, stability in turn leads itself to investment. Major companies, for example, will not go into a region in which there is instability. They will not risk their investment. So if you have stability, you are likely to enjoy at least a higher level of investment and therefore prosperity. When you have prosperity, then you are likely to have greater stability. So it's what I call a virtuous circle, that if you have stability, you will have the likelihood of greater opportunity for economic prosperity. That in turn generates more stability. How long will that take, and will you ever see a withering away, if I can use that phrase, of the military? The answer is I doubt it. You will always need a military in order to satisfy your constituents that you have self-protection, that you have self-defense for your country's interest, that you can maintain that self-defense in a way that is completely harmonious with your neighbors. It doesn't pose a threat to your neighbor that you have a military that is strong and disciplined and well-led. That should not pose a threat to your neighbor, and as long as you are approaching it on a regional basis, trying to build bridges, trying to share visions and values, then the likelihood of conflict emerging from that is more remote. But every country will always want to have some security force as such. At least for the foreseeable future, I do not see that kind of nirvana that you would never need a military. You will always need a military. Perhaps its size and shape and what it will look like will differ as we continue to evolve in the 21st century. But I doubt whether mankind itself has evolved to that point that we would say there never will be a need to have a defensive capability, because there will always be some suspicions, there will always be apprehensions, there will always be the rise of some discontent on the part of some. And to the extent that you have one area that is not sharing in the prosperity versus another area that is, then the likelihood of that kind of conflict gets greater. And so it's going to take time, and that is precisely why we have been advocating NATO, NATO enlargement, not to pose a threat to the Russians, not to pose a threat to any other country, but we see it as a way to provide for greater stability in a region that has known instability. That if we can reduce that, and also at the same time reduce fears on the part of those who might see it as a threat, then we have an opportunity to spread that stability over a much wider geographic area and reduce the kinds of things that we're seeing take place in Kosovo today, the kinds of things that took place with Bosnia. If we can reduce those tensions by spreading stability and prosperity, then we make the need for large armies and militaries less necessary. But we will always, I think, every country will want to have some protection just to be sure that they're not going to be taken advantage of. That was a long answer, so we still have one more question. Two more questions. We got this one. This one.
Господин министр, господин начальник Объединенных Штабов, для меня большая честь встретиться с вами. Я благодарен Центру Маршалла за предоставление такой возможности.
General Minister, it is a great pleasure and honor for me to have the opportunity to meet with you this afternoon, and I'm very thankful, very grateful to you and grateful to the Marshall Center.
Меня зовут Заза Батаридзе, я депутат парламента Грузии.
My name is Zaza Badaryev. I am a deputy of the Georgian Parliament.
Мы с США сотрудничаем в военной области на основе как двусторонних, так и многосторонних договоров. С помощью США Грузия восстановила инфраструктуру в области охраны государственной границы на море. Вчера я узнал, что в скором будущем на днях намечается визит министра обороны Грузии в США, в Вашингтоне. Вопрос мой состоит в том, что спросить вас, какова ваш взгляд и в каких направлениях в военной сфере, в военной области Грузия и США может сотрудничать в дальнейшем, в каких направлениях? Спасибо.
We are working together with the United States in the military sphere. We work together on a bilateral level as well as on a multilateral level. And also the United States have been helpful in setting up our sea border protection. And I know that in a couple days our defense minister will visit Washington, and I would like to hear from you what you see as being the prospects for our further military cooperation and in which direction this type of cooperation should go.
Would you like to answer this?
I'd be happy, but I'll take it.
No, the kind of cooperation that we are seeking is consistent with what I mentioned before about the Partnership for Peace program. The one thing that we tried to make clear is that the United States is not seeking any more territory. We are not looking to conquer anyone. We do not have designs on any other country. Obviously, to the extent that we can be successful in promoting stability in regions, to the extent that those countries can become more prosperous, that obviously presents an opportunity for our business community to invest and to share in that prosperity. It's a question that I have to answer many times up on Capitol Hill, for example, when I have members who will ask me, why do we have 100,000 of our troops over in the Asia-Pacific region? Why not let the Asians take care of Asia? Why not let the Europeans take care of Europe? And I have to point out that by our providing some stability to that region, and I was recently in China and made the same argument to the Chinese counterparts, that by the United States having a presence, we're not seeking territory, we're not trying to intimidate or conquer anyone, by providing a presence in the region and stability, because countries know we're not seeking any territory, that those nations, for the most part, have been allowed to prosper. China has been a major beneficiary of that stability because they've been allowed to prosper without having to build up a major military capability that would challenge all of those in the region. So everybody has prospered by that. We feel the same thing applies to Georgia or any of the other republics, former republics of the Soviet Union. That to the extent that they can have a stable environment, to the extent that there is stability, you will see investments. And when there's investment, there's an opportunity for prosperity that is shared by not only your citizens, but obviously other countries, the countries who send their businessmen and women there. They obviously want to invest so they can make a profit to distribute to their stockholders and to their countrymen. Everybody benefits when you have that rising tide. So what we would hope is to the extent that Georgia or any other country can share in Partnership for Peace, can share other types of relationships with the United States and other NATO countries and other European countries. We think that that will promote the kind of stability and prosperity that will hopefully benefit the people of Georgia.
Last question.
Моя фамилия Махмадов, я из Таджикистана.
My name is Mahmad.
Махмадов из Республики Таджикистан. Так, на наш взгляд, стабильность в центральноазиатских республиках прежде всего зависит от стабильности в Афганистане. И вот у меня конкретный вопрос. Насколько может Соединенных Штатов Америки влиять на движение талибов, значит, для стабилизации на этом регионе? Спасибо.
We think that the stability in Central Asia is to a great deal dependent on Afghanistan, and I would like to know, to hear from you, to which extent the United States can impact and show influence on the Taliban in order to stabilize the region.
General, you finally have a chance to offer a commentary.
I'll defer to you, Mr.
No, this is yours.
I think, as Secretary Cohen has said, the more that that our nations work together throughout that region, the more that we have a chance to foster peace and stability and cooperation among the various nations. Obviously, there are going to be challenges that will lend themselves to influence from some areas more than others. And I think that in this particular case, the more that the surrounding nations are participating or cooperating with one another, the greater they'll have a chance to influence the action in the adjoining countries, etc. Many times I'm asked, what is NATO for today if you're not against anything? And the answer is, as we've said several times, for peace and stability within the member countries and within the surrounding region. And so I think that as NATO continues to grow, as it has now with or has the potential to do with the 3 new nations coming in, that we will see greater stability. One of the proud things that NATO has is that none of its members have fought each other for 50 years. That's a pretty enviable record, I think, and says that among those 16 nations, soon hopefully to be 19 nations, you have a chance for maybe another half a century of peace and stability. But by working with one another and approaching some of the crises on a regional basis, you'll have a chance to influence things like Kosovo, like Afghanistan, more than you can if you're trying to deal with that in a bilateral or even a multilateral with 2 or 3 other nations. A regional approach, I think, would lend itself much more than a one-on-one.
If I could add just one complicating factor to all of this. As you are studying the role of the military in a democratic society, you will also discover that in the United States we have a number of values that we insist upon. And that when the members of Congress, who in fact are controlling, they are responsible for raising and supporting an army. So they have control of what we call the purse strings. When they see that a country is engaged in repressive behavior, when they see that there are abuses of human rights, when they see that there are activities underway, either taken by the military or by the political leadership of a country, that is inconsistent with our stated ideals, there is a reaction. And that reaction would be to, let's cut off funding to that particular country. Let's not sell certain weapons to that particular country. That in turn builds resentment in the country that we've been dealing with. And so we have to also deal with that kind of an issue in order to, how do we have influence in Afghanistan? What kind of relationship do we have with Pakistan? What kind of relationship do we have with India? What happens if Pakistan and India don't have good relations? How do we build a regional approach to dealing with Afghanistan? It gets very complicated because there are issues in which congressional members say, we do not want to see the United States taxpayer dollars going to a country that doesn't measure up to our high standards. So that is something that also complicates the issue as we try to build these kind of regional relationships. We have had for a long time the issue of whether or not China should be granted most favored nation trading status. Every year that comes up for a vote. President Clinton is in favor of extending most favored nation status, which really means regular trading status to China. We have found that by engaging China in military-to-military contacts, political-to-political contacts, not only congressional, but my own office in dealing with my counterparts in China, we're able to successfully at least break down some of the misunderstanding. Now, that's a way in which China can be helpful in us dealing with North Korea, by way of example. Our relationship with Japan also may be helpful in dealing with China. So as we try to build the network of understanding, realizing that we're not always going to have unanimous agreement, that nonetheless, if we build what the chairman was saying in terms of a regional approach, we have a much better chance of influencing behavior in a particular country than if the United States says, we don't like what you're doing over in Afghanistan, here's how it's going to be done. We don't have that kind of influence on any single country that we can dictate the terms of what is going to take place inside that country. We can raise questions, we can say, here are our values, you won't get help unless you abide by these, but unless there is a concerted effort and a regional or much wider approach to it, it's unlikely that country is going to be responsive. So I agree wholeheartedly with the chairman and what he has just expressed to you in terms of how do we have an impact upon Afghanistan by approaching other countries in the region to see if we can't build a consensus and a common plan for helping to shape the attitudes of those people in a given country in a positive way.
And if I could just add one additional comment. I think as the world changes, and I think we all agree that what we've seen in the last few years is indicative of the way that the world is changing, and I think we'll see even more of that as we look out toward 2010, to where we'll be dealing more with asymmetric and transnational threats to each of our countries, and the more alliances, cooperative agreements that you have with your neighbors that allow you to take on these threats, be it terrorism, organized crime, drugs, those are threats to each of our societies that transcend boundaries. And if we have these agreements and we are working with one another, then we can take on these threats to our different governments in a much more effective and efficient manner.
The military is not supposed to have the last word in our society, but here today they do.
Secretary Cohen, General Shelton, before you depart, on behalf of the 28 countries represented here as members of the executive force of George C. Marshall Center, we would like to leave you with a token of our appreciation for spending so much time with us. These volumes are George C. Marshall's interviews and reminiscences. They have been signed by all the members of the force with their countries indicated. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No question.